Hello everyone. Oh, I can see some of you, which is kind of nice to get some faces here. I might just move some of the faces. You probably don't know who I can see and who I can't see, but I can see some of your faces, which is really nice. So welcome. I'm in Australia and it's 7 a.m. here. So I think we're kind of all over the world with lots of different people. So welcome. And we're going to talk about young people and the space we're in right now and how we might help them. So as John said, I'm Louise Hayes. I'm a clinical psychologist and I work in practice. I also do training and write some books and do some development. And I'm going to talk today in acceptance and commitment therapy that Joseph Cherokee did 2015. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a walk around so that you can see what DNAB looks like. But it's also very practical and applied. So it's really kind of like all of the pieces that you might help a young person with or help yourself with if you are a young person or a person my age, because I did it for myself this morning too. So that's how we're going to roll. So it's pretty much practical and applied. There are some slides in here that I'm not going to read. They've got quite a bit of text, but I've put those text slides in for you so that you can follow up later on with some extra information. So if I skip over them, that's why. It's so that you've got some follow-up information if you want to. But most of the things we do in here are things that you could do with a young person. And then some parts are our professional conversations that we might have. And a lot of the work that we're doing, now why is this not advancing? Oh, here we go. Okay, a lot of the work inside this webinar today is from the new book that Joseph Cherokee and I wrote called Your Life, Your Way. And that will be released in September in the US and a bit later in some other places, I expect. And we're really excited about it. It's written for teenagers. And we spent quite a bit of time. It's probably the best thing we've ever done. We spent quite a bit of time thinking about how to speak to teenagers and young people. And we wrote exactly into their voice and we're really excited about it. It's got lots of pictures and artwork and things that make it different. And just on, just if you wanted some more information on a webinar I did recently, you can follow up this link. I ran a webinar 2 or 3 months ago on young people and supporting them with climate change, and that information is still there. You can just follow that link if you want that. And throughout this presentation, there's some artwork from young people, and most of the artwork, I just want to give credit to, it comes from UNICEF and the Voices of Youth activity, which has got some really nice artwork that you might want to use or look at and talk to young people about. It's really important, of course, that we hear young people's voices. So the work that inside DNAB, most of it, the developmental model of acceptance and commitment therapy, you'll see in The Thriving Adolescent, the book that we published in 2015. So you can get information, more information on the model if you're new to this inside The Thriving Adolescent. Or you can go to our website down at the bottom here, thrivingadolescent.com, and there we've got some papers. You can read more of the theory and the background behind it. You can get some resources, you can watch a few videos, you can get some free downloads. So if you want to go there, thrivingadolescent.com, you'll get the back information if this is new to you. Okay, so we can begin. We're going to begin with a little exercise. Now, one of the tricky things about doing a webinar is you're kind of talking to yourself for most of the time. You're supposed to look at this little green dot and talk to yourself. So we're going to do a little exercise, and I can see some of your faces. So we're going to do a little tiny exercise that shows you what DNAV is in a webinar format. And sometimes people say to me, how do I explain DNAV? And usually I introduce it to young people in just a couple of sentences. And this is a bit of a silly way to do it, but I did it for the webinar. And so what I want you to do first is, we're going to use our discoverer first. So discoverer is just a word to describe things that we do and behaviours that we can engage in and trying new things. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to ask you to do, is make a silly face. Right? Make a silly face or a funny face. And I can see some of you, but only a few of you, but you can all see me, right? So firstly, I'm going to ask you to make a silly face, and I'm going to do 1, 2, and it goes like this. I haven't practiced. So I want you to do a silly face. And then that's discovering something new. Just doing a silly face to see what happens. As I did that silly face, I became aware of what I noticed inside me. Okay, and what I noticed was that I felt really silly, and I noticed my chest flooded, and I felt really anxious. That's what we call noticing, or being a noticer. And then while I did that, I also gave myself lots of advice. The advisor is a word that we use to describe how we talk to ourselves and how we navigate the world with language. And so while I was doing that, I was giving myself advice like, oh my goodness, this is so silly, Louise. People will think you're an idiot. Or I will think I'm silly. And so in that little exercise of making a face, we discovered and tried something different. We saw what happened with our noticer and what happens inside us. And I gave myself some advice. And this is the 3 kinds of behaviours that we talk about in DNAV. 3 different behaviours that pretty much cover most things that humans can do. And we use our DNA to help us live. And you'll find out through the presentation, you can use different words. You don't need to use these words. Then the other part of DNAV is stepping back and taking what we call a self-view. And so a self-view is just like imagining being able to see yourself with a selfie, being able to see that the way other people see you and how you see yourself. So how I saw myself when I was doing that is to make judgments and evaluations about myself and to wonder whether this was a silly thing to do. The next part of DNAV is social view. Social view is stepping in even bigger beyond looking at yourself to look at how others might see you. And how, in this particular exercise, how you might see me for asking you to make a face. So social view is just taking a bigger picture. And also, social view is understanding that when I asked you to make a face, there are some of you who went, oh, I'm not going to do that. And some of you who did. Right? And that's fine. We all have our own way of discovering, noticing, and giving ourselves advice. So social view and self-view are contextual views on our 3 behaviours of discovering, noticing, and giving yourself advice. And we use our DNA to create and build our V. V stands for vitality and value. And we use our DNA to help us build our V in our life. And so that's a very simple explanation of how we might use DNAV. So I'm going to begin with thinking about our V in the context of the world that we're in right now. Firstly, to manage change and hardship, we first have to know ourselves. We have to know what we care about and what we might value. And we need to know what kind of person we want to become. And then we can discover strength that we didn't know we had. And we can find our passion and energy and drive. And we can overcome anything if we know those things. So this is the framework we're going to use as we walk through DNAV today. Inside DNAV, or outside DNAV. We use evolutionary science to think about how as humans we adapt and evolve and change. And we draw a lot on the work of evolutionary scientists such as David Sloan Wilson, who looks at multi-level selection, thinking that I am an individual in a group, and then my group gets bigger, family, then community, and then country, and then world. And multi-level selection helps us understand the ways in which humans exist in that system. And one of the things that we can take from multi-level selection is that understanding the big group and taking a view of the big group can be really helpful for all of us. So there's us and our families and our smaller groups, but when we step back and see the big group, right now that big group is humanity and possibly every creature on the earth. But if we just take it as humanity, it gives us a common cause to start thinking about the ways in which we adapt and can evolve and change as a group. So I just want to point to that just briefly as we move through, because we have a value that is shared. And right now, what we share is a need for our loved ones to be safe, the people we care about to be safe. And then if we take a bigger view, our society to be safe and well, the world of humans to be safe and well. And so this bigger multi-level selection is really important in terms of thinking about beyond ourselves. So there's me and we inside DNAV. Rhymes. It's not just what I value, but it's what we value as well. And here's a recent study that came out by Usteroff and Palmer. They were so quick off the mark, these folks. It's a recent study on a COVID-19 survey of 770 youth, just done in March. And they asked questions like how important it is to consider the needs of other people, to make sure that all people are treated fairly, and to think about how the individual actions affect the people in the future. And what they found is that greater social trust was associated with less hoarding. And young people who reported valuing their own self-interest over others reported less social distancing and more hoarding. And these researchers argue that the social implications of the pandemic-related behaviours are important for teens. So the more we can connect to the value of the social group, the value that we hold, as well as the value that we have for individuals and ourselves, the more we will get through this situation. So you can see this multi-level selection happening right here, thinking about ourselves and then our groups. I've got this funny little line and I don't know how to get rid of it, so I'm just going to leave it there. So we're going to begin by walking around DNAV with that as our overarching framework. And what I'm going to ask you to do as we do it, we're going to do this experientially, because we don't tell young people what to think, or we don't tell each other what to think. We need to do it through an experience. So what I'd like you to do is use your notepad, or grab a piece of paper or your phone or anything that you've got, and see if you can draw a circle that looks like this. It doesn't have to look as pretty as this, but see if you can just draw a circle on a piece of paper. Trying to get rid of this line, but it doesn't work. Oh, eraser. I don't know how to get rid of this line. Done. Okay. Okay. So once you've got this disc, as we go around the presentation, I'm going to ask you to follow along. And we're going to do DNAV for ourselves. then that will help us understand how to work with young people when we use the same framework. And I've got one that I prepared earlier for myself, and you'll see it when I get through the presentation. You'll see it as I go. Oh, hang on. John, I wonder why it's not advancing the slide.
Has it just suddenly stopped advancing them?
Yeah, what I've got is a...
What I would try to do is, let's just stop the share and reshare it.
I can't stop the share. All I've got, it only lets me go on more.
All right, well, hold on a second. Then what I will do is...
Oh, no, it's fixed. It's fixed.
Oh, okay.
It's gone now.
All right.
Who knows? Let's see. Yep, we're right. Okay. So we're going to begin with the noticer. And so I'm going to give you a noticing practice by showing you a couple of videos and a couple of things. And as you notice, what I would like to invite you to do is I want you to think about making just any notes in the noticer space that you become aware of. So just make any notes that you become aware of what's going on inside you, maybe what you become aware of in terms of your body or your feelings. Really mostly focus on your sensations and your bodily awareness as you watch what happens here. I'm going to begin by showing you a video of a young person. So anything you notice, just make a note of what you become aware of.
I just feel so lonely all the time. Like, I talk to my friends, but as soon as I'm done talking to them, I'm like, oh my God, where did everyone go?
I've been really low energy. I've been really depressed. It's fun.
If I could go outside right now, I would probably go play basketball. And it's just my way to clear my mind and be happy.
I'm not worried about coronavirus for myself, like getting it, because I believe that I'd probably be fine.
My biggest fear is, being a carrier for coronavirus and spreading it to my family and loved ones who are immunocompromised.
What scares me most right now is the pace it's picking up throughout the world.
I feel like every day it kind of hits a little closer to home.
What scares me the most is my grandparents getting it.
My grandma loves to come over. She loves to garden in our yard and help out whatever she can. But I'm so worried for her.
Just make a few notes about what you become aware of as you watch that, and think about what happens inside your body as you watch the dialogue from these young people. And then I'm going to broaden that out to think about what we know is happening inside our world right now. We've had, just in a very short space of time, fires and floods, and now pandemics, a climate crisis. And now we face economic challenges, political turmoil, healthcare workers struggling, media bias, worries about social media. To me, it feels like it's kind of never ending. And so I want you to just make a few notes about what happens inside you as you think about all those things, not just the effect on young people, but the effect on all of us. And what you notice in your body as you consider this. And just write them in the noticer space. And I'll show you my example. As I just did this as I was preparing the presentation. And this is what I noticed as I prepared those things. I noticed that I felt fear, that I mostly want to run away. I noticed a heaviness in my chest and low shoulders, like just oh my goodness. I noticed anger and sadness. But I also sometimes notice that I get frustrated and really annoyed. And then I feel despair, a real sense of despair. And so the noticer is all about being aware of what happens inside you and starting to tune ourselves into those things. And I'm going to ask you, soon we're going to open the chat and ask you for some of your experiences, but I just want you to think about, what do you experience inside you right now? And write that down. No one will see what you write. Just take a moment to be aware of it. And what's happening inside you is a label that we use to describe it called being a noticer. You can use any other word that fits. If you're from a non-English speaking background, any word is fine. We call it being a noticer. And what happens is we can notice in ways that are helpful and ways that are unhelpful. So typically, and there's no right or wrong, but typically unhelpful behaviours include not being aware of what's going on inside us, or overreacting to what's happening inside us, not being able to describe our feelings or pushing them away, hurting ourselves or not being aware of others, and not being aware of life around us. The important thing with DNAV is you get to decide if it's helpful or unhelpful. There really is no right or wrong. Unhelpful is if it makes your life small or fixed or rigid. Helpful ways that you might notice include being aware of sensations in your body, being able to slow down and pause, being able to describe feelings, allowing feelings, even negative ones, being aware of how other people feel, noticing what's around you, and grounding yourself whenever big feelings arrive. So once again, I really want to stress there's no right or wrong here. I've put in typical behaviours, but really helpful or unhelpful depends on how it works for you and what happens when it arrives. So now that we've got a sense of what noticing is, we want to move into being able to do two things: to accept and then act. Now with accept, in acceptance and commitment therapy, is we can't tell people that they have to accept it. We want to do it experientially. We want to show people what it's like. So what I want to do is encourage you to do a little acceptance exercise with me. We're going to do a little practice around what it feels like to have these feelings and how we can move into making space for them. And we're going to use a little piece of artwork to help us if you want to look at the screen. But what I'd like you to do is just see if you can gently close your eyes for a moment, or look at the screen and the artwork if you prefer. But I want you to take a moment to really tune in and be aware of what's happening inside you. I've spent a few minutes talking about all the difficulties in the world. And I want you to find a space where you can really feel it the most inside you. Like I can feel it in my chest. And I want you to notice what happens when you become aware of your breath. And then when you center your awareness on your body, just see if you can notice your body in the chair. And then I want you to take notice of the things that are around you, anything at all that happens to be outside you. And then I want to switch your viewpoint from yourself. I want you to think about others the people you love and the people you care about. And I want to invite you to see if you can send them a little message of calmness, a little moment of peace. See if you can send out to someone you care about, or all of the people on this webinar. A message that we feel the same. And then I want to invite you to take in the message from the hundreds of people that are in this webinar or out in the world. And notice that on the other side of that fear is love and kindness and a need to keep each other safe. And when you're ready, I'd like you to open your eyes. And I want to invite you back. And just so that we can actually really feel that we're connected together, I'm going to ask John to open up the chat. And I want to see what happens. If in
All right,
this
everyone.
chat,
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to let you know the chat's available now, or should be
so-
anyway. You should see it down on the bottom. If you mouse over, there's a little cartoon voice bubble. And then here's some of the things that are coming in as we're dealing with that. People saying, knowing that you are loved, courage, grace, you are not alone. Believe, lean in, choose
Is
love.
there any way we can see the chat?
You can see it if you mouse up to the very top of the share space there. And on the right-hand side, you'll see sort of 3 dots.
Oh, now I can't. I'm having trouble with my mouse. Here we go. I've had to unshare it too.
You could also just turn off the share and look at the chat if that's easier. You just have to restart the share later.
No, you can just, it doesn't say how to show it. I can't work out how to see it. So you just tell me you can just share it with me. But if other people can see it, that's great.
Yes, yeah, everyone should be able to see that. It is a little tricky with the share up, but it's just people saying things like you're not alone, sharing love, choose what you love, we will survive together. Those are some of the most recent ones to come up. Be kind to yourself.
There's 70 of them. Can you all see them? Just give me, I can see a few faces, so nod if you can see all the chats.
So
Oh,
yeah,
now
we are
I've got
together.
them.
Hope. Oh, now you can see them? Okay.
No, I've got them.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. They're beautiful messages to send to us and each other and young people. Be gentle with yourself. We're stronger together. We're one world. We are together. Really beautiful messages. And what you see there is that acceptance is not in telling people to accept. It's in the practice that we do and in connecting with our noticer and thinking about how we can use that to be together now. Okay. So now, if you have space, I want to use your noticer to think about ways that you might connect with your value, only if you feel like you have space. So in the centre of the disc, we have value. And I've got some examples of ways that young people might connect with a value, or I might connect with my value, and it's unique to us. But you can use your notice the skills to connect with your value. Some examples that young people have provided, or some research shows, is with my body, you might do things like dance or sing or play sport or yoga or pat the dog. With my awareness, I like to look at nature and people and pets. And with my feelings, things that I might like to do. And so the idea is to do things that help your notice the skills to connect with what you care about. And then we can strengthen our notice the skills by looking at a social view, as we just did with the chat, by smiling and laughing together, or hugging, watching a friend or a family, telling stories, and practicing kindness. One of the things that I often wonder about with being a noticer is that it's not really amazing things that help. It's awareness and pausing and using that to bring ourselves back into the moment. And I want to give a nod to young people when it comes to being a noticers, because young people see the world with new eyes. And they see fresh, and they notice big feelings, and they see with new eyes. And I think it's important for us to kind of help them show us what they see. Okay, so we're going to come back to this disc shortly. Here we go. So in the noticer piece, what I've done is written some things that I might do in red to help me notice, or that I might help a young person. So what I've written down for me is I might practice being aware. I might pause. I might take some mindful action. And when I get stuck, I might switch out of my noticer into one of my other DNAV behaviours. So you can fill that in later on. You can go back to some of the slides and fill in, if you want to, for yourself, some of the actions that you might take and some of the ways that you might accept. You can do it now if you want, but otherwise you can fill it in later on like I've done and think, okay, these are some things that I'm going to practice. Being aware, pausing, taking a small mindful action with my noticer, and switching when I get stuck. We're going to flip to the advisor, the one that we spend lots of time with. And once again, I'm going to ask you to get this piece of paper and watch what happens with your advisor as I show you these experiences. This is just a snapshot of the last 24 hours of newsfeed. I tried to go across a few English-speaking countries because I can't read anything other than English. So I tried to balance it out with Australia and US and UK. So this is just 24 hours. And as you watch this, I want you to start being aware of what you tell yourself about it, and what kind of advice you start giving yourself about what might happen. And as you listen to some of the data on what happens with young people, I want you to think about what advice you tell yourself, what languaging you use. So the data on young people and disasters show that young people are easily overlooked in disasters, and that the stresses for young people can be prolonged. Fear of infection, frustration and boredom, inadequate information. Often we don't talk to young people, or adults don't talk to young people. Lack of in-person contact, friends, loss of attachments. And some research suggests this can be enduring and long-term for young people if they don't get the right support. So some health outcomes for young people inside disasters and isolation and quarantine include acute stress disorder, adjustment disorder, and grief. One study showed that 30% of children who were isolated or quarantined met the clinical criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. So COVID is an unusual pandemic. Well, it's a pandemic and everything's unusual about it. But what I mean is that it can feel like it's only affecting the old people and not the younger people. But that's actually not the case. We may overlook young people, but they will be as affected as we all are, particularly when it comes to things like separation and loss that they will face, as we all face it. So the research suggests young people will be affected too in different ways. And this is a UNICEF policy brief that young people are not the face of the pandemic, but they may likely be its biggest victims. Young people of all ages and in all countries will be affected by the socioeconomic impacts, and it may last a very long time for them. And the harmful effects won't be distributed equally. Of course, the more disadvantaged, financial and economic and environmental disadvantage, the more likely these people will be affected. So as you think about all of those things and start to wonder what's going on, I want you to use your advisor. And your advisor is a word we use to describe problem solving, planning, talking to yourself, telling yourself what you should do. And in the advisor, a little piece of paper, I just want you to make a note of some of the things that you tell yourself. I'll share some of mine, but I want you to write a few of yours. One of the things that I often say, and I find myself saying, is they need to fix it. They need to fix it. And it will never get better. Why did this happen? Sometimes I say to myself, I don't want to go out. I want to stay here. How do I protect my loved ones? There's a whole lot of problem solving and languaging that goes on and predicting what might happen. So the advisor is a word for giving your self-talk and the way you actually predict what's going to happen in the world and predict what you should do to make things better. And often when you hear advisor talk with young people and with us, you hear blame and judgment and evaluations and rules about the way things should be. Like, it should not be like this. They need to fix it is a rule that I have. So just pause for a moment and think about and make a couple of notes, even if it's just one or two. What is your advisor telling you about this? What do you predict or judge or evaluate? And nothing has to be pretty in here. You can write anything that happens. So advisor is a label we use to describe how we tell ourselves and predict what's going to happen in the world and how we fix problems. Now, once again, we've divided it into unhelpful and helpful ways that we can use our advisor. But I really need to stress, there's no such thing as saying this is unhelpful and this is helpful. These are only typical ways, because helpful or unhelpful depends on when you do this. Does it make your life small, fixed and rigid? Or does it give you space and flexibility? So typical unhelpful advisor behaviour includes worrying too much, overthinking about the past, criticising or being mean to yourself, telling yourself unhelpful things like I'm worthless, wasting a lot of time thinking about stuff that is unimportant or outside of your control. Social media is a really good way to think about what happens when we spend too much time with our advisor, is all of this information telling ourselves. Helpful ways can include things like using problem solving to improve your life, thinking about the past to learn from mistakes, thinking about how you might improve something, being aware that your thinking is not helping, being aware when your thinking is not helping, and telling yourself helpful things like, there are reasons for people to be like this, or there are reasons for people to like me, or I can keep trying. And always we get to help young people decide whether it's helpful or unhelpful based on, does it help them be flexible and connect with what they care about? Does it make their life bigger, make themselves bigger or smaller? So we're going to do a little practice here. I'm going to ask you to use your advisor to accept and act. But first, in the accept part, I want to ask you to think about how good your advisor is at predicting what happens. Most of us tend to think we're pretty good at predicting what happens. And so this little clip that I'm going to show you from Julie Nolke, I find is really useful for helping us think about actually really how good are we at predicting. So this is Julie Nolke. She's an actor in, I think, Canada. She put together this little skit that I've used quite a bit with young people to show them and get a perspective on prediction. So this is Julie Nolke and January 2020 self talking to April 2020 self 4 months later.
Oh, whoa. Who are you?
I'm Julie from 4 months in the future.
Actually? Are you here to tell me what's going to happen?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because of the butterfly effect, I can only really give you some loose details, but we'll go through the basics, yeah.
Okay, cool.
So, do you want the good news or the bad news?
Oh, good news?
Yeah, oh,
yeah.
Great choice. Yeah, cool. So, things have never been better for climate change.
No, that's great.
Dolphins in the Venice canals.
Really?
I know. Well, I mean, I saw it on Facebook. I don't know if it's a real thing. My aunt posted it, but it seems pretty legit.
Oh, okay, well, that's incredible. You know, especially given the Australian wildfires.
The what? Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, those are pretty, like, I think those are going to be the defining feature of 2020.
Yeah, you'd think.
Oh, no?
Not even a little bit.
Really? Because they're a pretty big deal.
Yeah, your definition of a pretty big deal is going to change, for sure.
Wow. Okay, so what is the bad news then?
You are going to want to pull all your investments.
What?
Yeah, get everything out of the stock market. Get it all out.
Oh, it's a recession.
You know what? Put a little money in Zoom.
Isn't that a conferencing app?
Yes, trust me.
Okay. While we're being proactive here, actually, if you could just do a Costco run real quick,
That's going to save you a lot of hassle.
Costco.
Do you have any hobbies?
You know, just something to keep you busy. No, not really.
You should get a dog.
I want a dog. You know, I want a dog. They're a lot of work, and you've got to walk. You got to go outside with them twice a day.
Right. The walks are going to be clutch.
Right, but I mean, I have to leave them because I have so much travel coming up.
Oh, no, you don't.
But yeah, I travel for work.
Oh, you won't be working.
But how do I afford stuff?
Do you take vitamins or juice?
No.
Okay, it might be a good time to just, you know, get that body in tip-top shape. Get strong. Get those lungs a pumping. You know, cardio, little aerobics.
What the hell is gonna happen?
Look, I know it all sounds scary, but it's really not that bad, you know. For you, right? I mean, for some people, it's not, but for you, it's really not bad. I would, you know, would you rather be in a busy shopping mall or at home on the couch watching Netflix?
The couch?
Exactly. You're gonna be just fine.
Okay.
What do you know about the world of big cats?
So how good are you at predicting? We're really not so great at it. We think we are, but we're really not so great at it. And that's a nice little way of experiencing what it means to actually accept that your advisor is not always able to predict what's going on. It's very useful for some things. And so, oops. We want to be aware of our habits of thinking with our advisor. Be aware of when you get stuck dwelling on what is happening right now in the world, and what might happen in the future, and when you worry about things or when you worry about others. And accepting and acting with your advisor skill. One of my favourite things to do with young people with accepting and acting with their advisor skill is to make new rules. Make new self-rules. And here's one from a young person who did this piece of artwork and wrote a new rule for himself. It's also important to remember that we are human beings and we're allowed to not feel okay all the time. And these kind of little rules can be so powerful for us to think about and to remind ourselves. That accept that the negative thoughts are your advisor's job. Its job is to keep you alive and to keep you safe. And that your advisor does this all of the time, constantly thinking about what's going to happen and what I need to do and how can I fix this. And accept that we can't predict the future. And that your advisor is good for lots of things, but not very good at some things. And it makes mistakes. And accept that others around you will use their advisor differently. Some people are fixers, some are worriers, some are avoiders. And you control others. You can't control others with your mind or by telling them all your way. Well, that should say you control others with just your mind. I think that should say you can't control others. So when we talk about acceptance in this model, we want to do it experientially. This is a nice way to do it experientially on a webinar, because you can really get a sense of, well, what am I doing with my advisor? Am I doing it like Julie? And how useful is that to me? So helpful or unhelpful, as we describe it back here, is really best drawn out experientially in any way that you can with a young person, to really get a sense of what we want to do with our advisor is use it when it's helpful and step out of it when it's not. Oops. And so, acting with our advisor, these slides have got a lot in them, so I'm going to skip over it. You can come back to it because I want to show you just the important pieces. We can make new rules, and we can use those new rules often. Try a new rule and test it out. My favourite rule that I use often all the time these days is you're never too small to make a difference. And I didn't make it up. I borrowed it from Greta Thunberg because I liked it so much. So make new rules with the young people that you work with, rules that are useful right now. A rule, you can make new rules. You can try those new rules and see if they work. Right? A new self-rule that I have is you're never too small to make a difference. Another advisor rule that I talk to young people about, to ask them if it works, is this will end. To remind themselves, this will end. Often it feels like it won't end, that we'll be here forever. It will end. We don't know when, we can't predict when, but it will end. And then use their advisor to problem solve. What can I do now? How do I step out of my advisor and into my noticer? Or how do I use my discoverer? Or how do I use my advisor in ways that are going to help me connect with what I care about right now? And how do I step away from my advisor when it's predicting things that it really has no capacity to predict? One of the most important things when we get stuck with our self-advice is to switch. We call it switching viewpoints, stepping from one viewpoint to another viewpoint. This is a piece of photography that I really liked because it's a nice way to switch viewpoints. This young girl is, with her video of herself, is helping us switch from the advice into stepping into a place of noticing what it might be like to be her, just with a photo. What might it be like to be her? And then when we change our viewpoint, we can then step back to advice if we want to. And think about what kind of new rule might you make for yourself. Maybe it will be, this will pass. Maybe it will be, I can cope. Maybe it will be, I have hope. So I want you to think about what new rule you might make for yourself and test it out and try it. No one can ever tell you whether a rule works or not. You need to test it out and try it. And so I want you to Write a rule in here if you can, and I'll tell you my rule that I use often. It will end. It will end. I use my advisor to remind me all of the time, it will end. And so in the chat, John, I want you to open up the chat again if you can. And let's see if we can share some rules that we might make for ourselves and share them with other people, because sometimes people are far more creative than me.
All right, the chat is up, folks. Some of the things we're seeing are...
Wow, you guys are fast. This will pass. I've got it on now.
Okay.
I can breathe. Wow, small steps, wonderful. Head up, that's beautiful. It's okay not to be okay. Give it a try. Love wins. It's not forever. Let it be. Keep doing. Stay on the path. I'm going to find a way at the end of this to share these chats with the people who attended so you can get a sense of different behaviours. You're not alone. Celebrate the small things. Allow yourself to play. It's wonderful ways to use your advisor, isn't it? Just switching from the despair and the judgment and the blame to using it in ways that's going to help us right now. Be grateful. Reach out. Find the beauty. Stay in touch. Oh, beautiful rules. So imagine if you're working with a young person and you find a way to make these new advisor rules with them. And you can draw it or paint it or put it on a word cloud or simply write it in here and say, when your advisor starts telling you things are terrible, it'll never work out, find a way to test some new rules. Thank you so much for your kindness in putting them there. It's so much better for me as a webinar. I actually get to see what you're thinking. Thank you. Be silly. What a great rule. Be silly sometimes.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn the chat off again.
Yep, turn the chat off, but you can keep putting those comments in because we'll find a way somehow to share them back. And then you've got some variations in behaviour that you can use, not just for the young people, but also for yourself and the clients that you work with. Do you have space to consider your value now? Now that you've looked at your advisor from the judgments and the blame and the predictions and stepped into a space where you can act with new rules and flexibility in those rules, do you have space now to consider what you care about? And once we have space to consider what we care about, we can use our advisor to connect with what we value. So in your work, you might do things like search for answers on the internet or organise your tasks. In your personal life, you might be gaming or making cool things or making creations. You might value self-care. I hope you value self-care. You might use your advisor to remember that its job is to solve problems. And you get to decide how you use that advice. And then if we step even bigger, the things I'm speaking are written here, so you don't need to scramble to write them. Pretty much everything is on the slide as ideas for you to work with young people. And then if we step in and use our advisor to strengthen our view of the world and all of the people in it, we can start to think about how we might act with our advisor in ways that broaden our social view and help us feel connected. You can act by debating or arguing the point or discussing or practicing kindness. You can act by thinking about other people's views and what it's like to be them, listening to their ideas, being open to their ideas. Reminding my advisor that their sharing of ideas is not always a threat to me. And ways of thinking it out bigger and bigger and bigger as we talked about multi-level selection in the beginning very briefly, is begin with I and then take it to the bigger. I love this piece of artwork. This is from UNICEF, but I love this piece of artwork. Some of you know I spend a lot of time in Nepal, and I run trips to Nepal. And I loved seeing this piece of artwork from a young girl in Nepal, that the strength of frontline workers is keeping us going, and we are hopeful. It's a lovely way for her to use her advisor to create a reminder that things are happening around the world and we're all together. So either now or after, take a moment to write down. Later on, you might do it. Some new ways that you can use your advisor flexibly, and make space for the ways that you use it inflexibly. Now we're going to switch to the discoverer. And you'll notice that I'm not really explaining a lot of depth about these behaviours. If you want to get some more, you can read online in the free articles that we have on our website about the theoretical parts inside the discoverer or the noticer. They're more than just words. They're actually just a class of behaviours, and we used a word to describe it. You can use any word. But inside the discoverer, what we're looking at is the behaviours that we engage in. Discover is a tricky word because it kind of has a positive feel to it. But what we're talking about in the discoverer is ways in which we act in the world, things that we do. And behavioural is trial and error learning, things that we do to help us live, and things that we learn. And so we're going to look first at some of the things that we're doing right now. I'm going to use a common phrase to help us. What are your behaviours or habits that you're doing right now that maybe you're not so happy about? Right? So once again, I'm going to ask you to fill it in here, to think about right now, when your advisor starts telling you this is terrible and they should fix it and why are we like this, and when you notice those strong feelings of anger and despair, what are the things that you then do? What are the behaviours that you engage in? Are you like SpongeBob and yell at other people? And I'm going to show you what mine are in just a moment. But, you know, common things are getting frustrated, getting angry, avoiding things. I'll show you what mine are. I think that's on the next slide. Here's some of mine, right? I overeat. I've been overeating like crazy these last few weeks. I forget to exercise. I get disorganised. I leave my tasks until the very last minute. I spent 12 hours yesterday writing this webinar because it was the last minute. I sleep in too late. I drink wine. Do a whole range of things that I'm not so happy about, but I do them. And so it feels like they help me in those moments, but actually I need to decide if they're helpful. So the discoverer is a label that we use to describe the part of you that does things in the world. It explores and tests things and uses trial and error to find out. So my job when I use my discoverer is to find out whether these things, overeating and not exercising and being disorganised, whether they're actually helping me right now, or whether they're just behaviours that I'm developed repertoires in and I'm often do. So unhelpful, once again, we just divide it into helpful and unhelpful. There's no right or wrong helpful or unhelpful. It depends on how it works for the individual. But typical unhelpful behaviours include acting impulsively, doing things that make your life worse, not trying new actions, or avoiding taking risks altogether so you don't make mistakes, not noticing the consequences of your actions, playing it safe and then you don't get better at things. Typically helpful behaviours include things like paying attention to the consequences of your actions. Is what you're doing helpful or is it leaving you stuck? taking a risk and trying something new in order to grow. This is what I was doing with this webinar. Challenging yourself to see if I can get better at something. Paying attention to whether my behaviour creates value and vitality in my life. And I can say without a doubt that the things I've written down there right now are not actually that helpful to me, but they're things that I've learned to do. And so as part of moving forward and taking action, when I was doing this webinar, I went, oh, I know these things. As soon as the webinar's over, I'm going to take some action that's different. I'm not going to make long lists. I'm going to simply turn around and do something that I know is a skilled, helpful discoverer behaviour. And I'm going to switch to flexible D. So I'm going to ask you to think about how you might do that in a minute. So once again, we use accept and act, as we've done all the way through this webinar, to think about ways in which we can get flexible with our discoverer. Accept and act. Wonderful phrase that Joseph Cherokee came up with, accept and act. And I'm using a young person's artwork again from UNICEF, and I really liked what this young person wrote, so I'm going to read it out and share it with you because it's such a discoverer phrase when you see the way they've written it. These times force us to find new ways to stay connected, engaged, and together. We now have all the time in the world to get creative and find new solutions to overcome this period, but also to change the world. Think of it as a stop in time. Think of it as a stop in time for you to gather ideas and get ready to put them into action when we go back to normal. Doing that, we will definitely have a powerful restart. And in their image, they've got small things like doing some work and being creative. So when it comes to accepting with our discoverer, this is sometimes new to people. Accept that some things you do in your life don't make your life better. Like my overeating of late. Accept that we all have bad habits. It doesn't mean I need to beat myself up. Accept that trying new things can be distressing and sometimes difficult. Act in a new or different way. Think of a new or different thing that you can do. Step out of your comfort zone for a bit and try something new and different. And I don't mean making long lists and suddenly turning your life upside down. Sometimes right now, in this situation with the pandemic, the new or different thing we might do might be sitting and relaxing on the couch. But that might be the best thing that we can do right now in this moment, when we're all so busy with so many tasks to do. But pay attention and notice what happens when you do that new thing. And if it works, keep doing it. My favourite discoverer exercises I phrase with active hope. Think about active hope, actions that you can do that will bring hope to you. Maybe a new activity, exploring on the internet because you can't go out. Build your skills, make some art, as all this beautiful artwork we've seen. I'm going to show you some photography in a minute that some young people are doing. Find a way to do something that brings active hope, even if it's small. Not a to-do list, but a small thing that you can do right now. Active hope for you at home. Active hope for the groups that you're involved in. Might be using technology to make sure that no one is left behind for young people who are creating groups, and for us that are creating groups on various media forums. Becoming a champion of your street, your school, your neighbourhood, and connecting people. Creating support circles and checking on each other, friends checking on each other. Using media to connect in ways that can be deeper, like a phone call or a house party, the house party app to connect people. Find a way to take a small action that makes you feel like life is still there. Stay connected with your areas of interest. This is an online climate action group, an area of interest for me, where people are connecting online, just like we're all connecting online in a way right now. This is a photography action group set up by a 16-year-old girl, Sophia, in Seattle. And she's asked people to use their cameras for eyes and photos for words, and to share their photos of young people during this time of isolation. And anyone can go online and share a photo here. So there is no end to our creativity in terms of things that we can do. But what we don't want to do inside this discover space is make it feel like we must do it. We have to do it. They're just more advisor criticisms and rules. You want to just think, what kind of active hope might I take now? And it can be small things like learning or sending a kind message or helping one of your siblings. These are actions that build active hope. Or sharing online in groups and staying connected. And remember that what we have is physical distance, not social distance. So I'm going to ask you to think a bit creatively. I want to ask you, and John, I'm going to ask you to open up the chat once more and see if you can share a small action. You don't have to do it, just an idea. See if you can share a small action that you might take, a small act of hope that you might take. And I'll share with you what I did. I wrote down that I'm going to take a walk. That's my personal action. After this webinar, it's morning here, I'm going to go and take a walk. I'm going to walk my dog. And then I'm going to make a phone call. I'm going to call someone that I care about and say hello. That's my action. There's my little acts of hope. Someone is going to plant in the garden. Someone's doing an online ballet class. Someone's going to do a work. Oh, write a letter to a friend, send a card, learn a cross stitch, FaceTime your family. Oh, wow, look how fast. Check on your neighbours. Do yoga. Call someone you haven't talked to in a while. Learn to sketch. You're so fast. Check on the older Nelly. Oh, learn to knit. Do an online course. This is an online course. There's some written in Chinese, which I'm sorry I can't read. Read for pleasure. Make a pie. Play board games. All of these small actions, and what we want to do, we're going to share this information. But if you think about all these small actions that we can see that we might do, and we put them together, then we find a way to start thinking about how we can help young people take small actions if they want to. Not as shoulds or musts or more to-do lists that just make us all stressed. Swim in the pool, do karate, have breakfast. You must be in Australia, the person who's going to have breakfast. Send postcards. Play with my kid. Nice. Wonderful to see. And just pause for a moment. And as you read some of those chats and think about some of the things that people are talking about that they're going to do to take active hope in the next little while, how does it make you feel inside you? What do you notice has happened with the thing we call your noticer, being aware of your body and what happens inside you? I notice that I suddenly feel this sense of lightness and this sense of almost happiness. And that's because I'm seeing how other people are thinking about what they might do. And suddenly I notice that my rules and my self-talk about how awful this is can change a little bit to we can do this. We can do this. Small things make a difference. You're never too small to make a difference. My advisor rule changes too. And now I get to find a way. Oh, I told you that. I get to find a way to come back to my V. I've got a bit of space. I've got some active hope. I've got some flexible ways that I can use my noticer. I can pause and be aware of the coming and going and how within the space of an hour I can have really dark, heavy emotions, and I can move to lightness. I've got ways in which I can notice my advisor being rigid and rule governed. This must be fixed. And I can move to rules that might help me at the moment. It will end. I can take action. And I'm going to come back to connecting with my value, what I care about. And I want to ask you to think about it. You'll notice I didn't ask you to fill in what you value in the middle, in the beginning. But what I want you to do is I want you to think about that now. Value and vitality comes from building our DNA. To manage change and hardship, first get to know yourself. Understand that the negative thoughts and the negative feelings are normal and natural and part of being human. Make space for that and allow yourself to know what you care about. And see if you can know what kind of person you want to become today. With your discover, what actions might you do today? How might you make space for the noticing inside you and allow it to be there today? How might you use your advisor for flexible rules today? And then you might just decide and find out what kind of person you want to become. And you'll discover strength you didn't know you had. And you will find your passion, your energy, and your drive. And we will overcome this. Together we will. So my action. I filled this in. I did this today as I was preparing the webinar, or yesterday. And I thought, after I walked all the way around, what is it that I actually value right now? And I was surprised that there wasn't a whole lot of stuff that came out. I wrote friends and family and others. And then I stopped and thought, that's pretty much it. Protecting the earth I added afterwards because that matters a lot to me. But I noticed there wasn't work, and there wasn't achievement, and that doesn't mean it's bad if you have it. But what I noticed is in this time, in this pandemic, what I valued became very, very focused on the people that I love. And when I wrote the earth, it's because of the earth that I love and the nature that I love. So I want you to think about yours. What is your V? And maybe we'll open up the chat again, John, if we can. This is an extra one.
All right, chat is on.
And what I want you to do in the chat is write down, what is your V? Freedom, love, compassion, kindness, gratitude, connecting, adventure, compassion, humanity. Oh, so beautiful. Love. So many people writing love, acceptance. Can you see all of those things that people are writing down? It's quite incredible to watch. Peace, caring, curiosity, lightness, sustainability. Being kind. So as the chats come through, I want to ask you whether you choose to care. Inside our values space, our job is to whether we choose, a thing we can do, something we can do is choose to care. We either get a path of knots, not caring, not doing things because of judgment or fear, letting our advisor and our noticer and our repetitive discoverer behaviours pull us away from the things we care about. We're choosing a path towards value, saying yes to caring, yes to following your heart, yes to active hope, yes to caring with an advisor rule. I choose to care about this. Yes to following my heart's journey. Inside my heart, I notice what it's like. And yes to active hope with my discoverer. And when it comes to value and working with young people, one thing that you can do that we have done inside the book Thriving Adolescent, and we've also done in the new book Your Life Way, is Your Life, Your Way, is to think about practicing building value, lots of different values if you need to, across 6 areas. And we don't need to send people off doing lots and lots of things where they have to do a value or have to move in a valued direction. What we want to do is create flexibility with your noticer and your discoverer and your advisor. Open up the space for the hard things that are there. Accept that those hard things are part of being human. And once we accept that those hard things are part of being human, it allows us to create a space for turning our discoverer, noticer and advisor towards more flexible things. And then taking a view of ourselves as bigger than just the things that we do that we are not so happy about. I am all of my DNAV. And then taking an even bigger view that your self-view is me and your social view is understanding that we're all got DNAV and we're all here and we're all connected to a group. And the more flexible we are with our DNAV, the more we can take that social view and connect with the whole thing when we get in a hard time. So I'm going to finish with a couple of practical things. John, I'm almost done. But somebody said they still can't hear me, so I've turned off share to see if I can turn my volume on again. And I can't even find my mouse. Oop. Oh, here it is. Somebody said they still can't hear me. So I'll turn it up a little bit, but we're right near the end anyway. I'm not sure why, but anyway, I'm sorry about that. Let me share again of the same screen. Oops, no, I'm still sharing it, aren't I?
Yes, it's still sharing.
I'm still sharing it. I just need to press play. Ah, okay. All right. So I want to wrap up with a little bit of a summary. It seems like as I was writing the webinar, it felt like I was covering a lot of ground, and it felt like it was getting a bit complex and complicated. And this is a table that Joseph Cherokee, my mentor and friend and co-author, and just a great guy to work with. Joe came up with this idea of using DNAV to have the concept of accept and act inside each part of DNAV. And this is from our new book, so you're getting a sneak preview of it. And so I put this in the slide so you can have a way of summarising what we want to help young people do. Now, the important thing inside DNAV is that we can't just tell people to accept, and we can't tell people just to act. That would just be more rule-governed behaviour. What we want to do is try experiential ways to show them, whether it's through a loving kindness meditation, whether it's through things like the video that I showed you of our ability to predict, whether it's through taking small actions in the room that you work with or in the space that you work with if it's online, and seeing what happens. And you remember I began in the beginning of this webinar by making a silly face, because we have to find a way to do some things online. And there's lots of things that we can do with our Discoverer online. It just takes a bit of thinking. So this is a way to summarise where we are. And if you're learning about DNAV and you're new to it and you want to think about things like conceptualising where a young person is at, you can go to this website, thrivingadolescent.com, and download some conceptualisation sheets that are free, where you can look at flexible and inflexible ways that people use their Discoverer and Noticer, Advisor and Social View and Self View. Lots of people use those for case conceptualisation and ways of understanding how to think of a young person's behaviour and help them. You can do some follow-up action if you want. There'll be these links are all in the PowerPoint that John has already said is online and connected. I'm going to do some follow-up training in around September. So if you wanted to connect and sign up for my newsletter, you'll be able to do a longer workshop, where you get to interact and learn some skills. So if you make sure you're on my newsletter, then I'll tell you about that if you're interested. If you want more about science and the theory. And I want to give a little bit of a conversation about pro-social and pro-social world. And so my friend and colleague Paul Atkins is, along with David Sloan Wilson and Steve Hayes, produced a book called Pro-Social and are involved in building pro-social communities, especially in this time, but always. And so if you go to prosocial.world, you'll find information on how to work with groups, especially if you work in groups of schools or groups with teachers or groups with therapists or groups of families or community members. Can give you some ideas. And there's a link here. Find out more about cooperation during COVID. Paul wrote an article that's published in the Greater Good, Berkeley's website. So if you go to that link, you'll find out some more things about how we can act more cooperatively during this time to work together. And if you're work with young people and you're looking for resources, here's some of the links that I go to regularly. There's lots of great international ones. There is no shortage of resources for helping young people. It's just a matter of kind of having them there for you so you can use them. Our UNICEF and the World Health Organization are great. If you don't know about the Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Network, it's a network that you can join. It's a really great go-to place, a network of professionals who always do their work in emergency and disaster relief. And it's across the world, so you'll find protocols there in pretty much every language, resources there in every language. And it's a great place to go and to get some resources, treatment protocols, all sorts of things, from the World Health Organization through to individuals who load it up. And they're experienced professionals who are working in emergency and disaster relief. And there's a couple of regional websites as well. So we have time for a bit of a chat. I'm not sure if I can answer questions because of the number of people that are online. Might make it a little bit difficult. But we have time to do a few questions. John, should we do a few questions?
We can certainly try. If we can see how this works out. It may get very busy, but I guess let's start. I'll turn the chat back on and we'll sort of see what happens. And if it gets just completely unmanageable, we'll try to figure out something else. But that's probably the most direct way we can.
Well, what we can do is, if you put your questions in the chat, what we can do is, I can't answer them all, but we will see them, and there might be a way that I can write a blog or something later on to answer some of the questions, or find a way to get that information out to you in any way that we can.
So the chat is enabled.
Okay.
And we've got our first question right there from Melody.
I can't see it. I've got to move my. I don't seem to have a way of.
Well, if you turn off the share entirely, we could just bring up the chat.
Okay.
In there. That's probably the easiest way to.
The problem that I have is.
Or I can try to read them off too, if that's.
Yeah, I don't seem to have I don't have a mouse. I don't know where it's gone. Ah,
okay.
Now I have a mouse. So if I stop share, all right. Yeah. And now I can see the chat. Ah, now I've got it.
Yeah, it is definitely filling up though. So so let us know if that seems manageable to you or not.
So any ways to motivate a year 7 girl who is not wanting to do school anymore now that it's online? Who asked that? Anna. Anna, I think this is an issue that we really are going to see quite a lot of, because a whole bunch of teenagers that I'm working with don't want to do school online. So what I would suggest is stepping into that discover space and finding a way for them to engage in things that they enjoy. It's going to be really difficult to just make them do school online. But if you can get some flexibility with things that they enjoy, some active hope, and some small actions. And then if you can connect with the fear or the feelings or the boredom that they might have with school, and then what you want to do is get out all those advisor statements. I hate this, it's not fair, why do I have to do it like this? All of those things are perfectly fine. You want to hear all of those things. And then see if you can ask them to do 3 things that they care about, and see what happens when they start to do those 3 things that they care about. Connecting with what they care about and thinking about what they care about might be helpful. Maybe they don't care about the schoolwork, but they care about talking to other people online. So I'd say the motivation is in active hope and new rules. This will change, this will end. And get them to make up their own rules. It can be okay to hate online school. Doesn't this, and then choose what you're going to do from there. I hope that was helpful. Motivation is one of the hardest things, and I think the way around it is through small actions that build active hope, and one action on another builds active hope. How do you help? Oh, Paige, that's a beautiful question and a really hard, emotional one to read. How do you help a young person to think about values when it hurts because they can't live by them at the moment? I think the most important thing there, Paige, is to not ask people to make sure they have to live by their values, but to spend time noticing spend time with validation and the grief that they feel that they can't live these values right now, and really spend time being able to connect and open up and share with them. Help them, as we did in those little exercises, to practice kindness and compassion around how they can't act on that value right now. And I think there's lots of noticing to be done. Self-care, compassion, kindness, lots of ways in which we can share together how difficult this is. And I don't think there's much more that we need to do around that. I can see there's some questions about the book. It comes out on the 1st of September. And we really do love it. I hate self-promotion, but we really do love it because it's written for teenagers, and we think it's going to make it all easier for you folk. And I don't know, 1st of September in the US, so I guess it'll be on Kindle straight after that. But in print, wherever, who knows what's going to happen with printing and how long that might take in each country, I don't know. Somebody asked about DNFE looks useful for adults. Certainly is. We're all adults, and so it can be helpful to use it like that too. I just want to say thank you for joining the webinar. I find webinars really difficult and challenging, and it's hard to talk to a computer instead of a real person. And it's very much like where we are right now. I've spent most of my days on telehealth doing the same thing, except I've got a person coming back to me. So I hope it's useful, and put some questions in the chat. You'll be able to follow it up by looking at the PDF, and you can see the things that I skipped over to help you have a prompt of how to help a young person when you work with them. I think that's all that we needed to do. Yeah, you'll have a prompt. Follow up that last slide that shows some resources if you want them. And I really did write the slides out so that you could think about each step. And there's a bit of detail in the slides, a few words, but I wrote them out so that you would have something to think about. Oh, okay, is this person able to make a new rule? Or is this person able to switch from this to that? Or is this person able to practice a little bit of kindness? Or is this person fighting themselves? So I hope that's useful to you. And thank you for all the wonderful thank yous that you're writing. And what we'll do is we'll put all these, I'm going to put all these comments that you made in each part of this together without your names. I'll put them in anonymously without names. And so that you can get a sample of each of the, what we might call the flexible D, N, A, and V. And that will help you think about ways in which you might engage with the young people about what some behaviours they might do, some ways they might use them flexibly. I want to answer one more question before we finish, because someone said, how much time do you spend working this model with a teenager? You can do this in a couple of minutes. You don't need to explain the whole model. What you need is the concepts in your head so that you understand the behaviours that we're talking about. And so when let's say you're having a 5-minute conversation with a young person who perhaps is hooked by really strong emotions. Right? And you know that that's their noticer, but you don't need to use those words. Right? If you've got 5 minutes, you might just practice the accept and act skills. Like you might just say, just take a breath for a moment and see if you can tell me what a word that describes what's happening there. And then you might ask them to see for a moment if you can think about what you might tell a friend in this moment. And in that moment, you've got a little 2-minute noticer exercise that's flexible. Often I just describe the model very briefly. I'll say to young people, humans have 3 things that they do. They tell themselves what to do, and we call this your advisor, giving yourself advice. They notice what happens inside them and around them, and we call this being a noticer. And they have things that they act on and engage in and do. We call this being a discoverer. And we're going to learn together how to discover, notice, and give yourself advice in ways that help you do things you care about, which we call your V. So that's an easy way to think about it if you wanted to explain it. And then from there, it's experiences them to help them build on it. And the model that I used today was drawing out the hard side, the difficult emotions when I used this. And we used a couple of videos and a mindfulness exercise and a few ways of thinking about drawing out the hard things that you do, the judgments you make, the evaluations you make, the emotions that you have, the despair, the frustration, the behaviours that you engage in, and drawing them out in a way that helps experientially us see that it's normal, that this stuff we do is normal, like overeating or being judgmental or being afraid. But there's also some skills that I can build on to help myself and use my advisor and noticer and discover in ways that are flexible and helpful, like giving myself a new rule. It'll end. This will end. Taking a mindful action by sending with my noticer, saying hello to a person, doing this webinar. Taking a small action with my discoverer, making that phone call or going for a walk. Or if I need to, sit on the couch and relax because that's what I need to for me. Right? And starting to find a way to do those small things. Please take care, and we're all in this together.